I know it's been a while, but I thought I'd give Rocket Summer a shot. That's Michael K. Vaughan's event, where we read science fiction, beginning with the 1930s or before for the first week, and the second week is the 40s, and the third week is the 50s, and the final week is the 60s, and then you can read science fiction from the actual good era of the 70s if you want after that, which is what I'll do. But anyway, I decided to uh, go back to some classics. I read The Time Machine, and I like this cover because it focuses on a strong visual element from the books that isn't usually used in illustrations anymore. Usually they use the time machine itself, the kind of like bicycle cart thing. But when the time traveler, gets to the future, he finds this Sphinx like monument there, a memento of a former civilization. It's a great book. You're probably pretty familiar with it. I thought I had read it. I wasn't sure if I'd read it in the past. Now I'm not completely sure that I haven't, but I don't think I'd read it before. I may have read like a Whitman classic version or something like that we have in the United States that might have been edited, although it's pretty short. You can read it in an hour. What I had planned to read for Rocket Summer this first week was the Professor Challenger stories from Conan Doyle. Still might read those, particularly The Lost World and maybe the sequel, The Poison Belt. I have those downloaded to read, but for some reason I just got off on H.G. Wells this morning. So I downloaded a big free anthology of all his ebooks, and I read that in like an hour, and I enjoyed it pretty well. It's kind of flat storytelling. It's his first novel, I believe, his first major novel anyway, his first major work of published writing. Pretty much just told matter-of-factly from the time traveler's point of view, wrapped inside the point of view of his dinner guest. So if you've seen the films, and I haven't seen the more recent film, but I saw the Robert Taylor film from the 50s. Saw that a long time ago, which I really liked a lot. It's a very faithful movie. Robert Taylor is great as the character. It's a George Powell film. So I enjoyed it, and then since I had the collection already on my device, let me see if I can find the cover of that. I just kept on reading, and here it is. This is what it, oh my God, where's the cover? I always forget you can't really do this on this device. The Complete Novels of H.G. Wells, 55 works, blah, 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 starting with The Time Machine. In the past, I'd read two of his books previously that I am definitely sure I've read, which is The Invisible Man, which I enjoyed quite a bit at the time. It's more of a horror novel than it is definitely science fiction because there is an invention in it. It's a pretty dark novel. His other books, despite the subject matter, seem to be more forward-looking and human positive, I guess. I don't know what to say. The other book I'd read by his in the past was The Island of Dr. Moreau, which is fantastic. One of my favorite novels. One of my favorite classic films from the pre-code Hollywood era, from the 1930s. Wonderful version. Of course, there's later versions too, which people kind of make fun of. There's a famous version, I think, in the 70s. Pretty silly Marlon Brando version, which is kind of worth watching, but it's a mess. But for a real feel of the story, watch the 1930s version with Charles Laughton, or read the book. It's a great read. And then but those are previous H.G. Wells. That's just to give you some of my H.G. Wells history. Then I read a book that I'm fairly sure I never read before, and after I read it today, I know I hadn't, and it's The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, which is written about 3 years after, I have a list here, about 3 years after, oh my goodness, what did I do with it? I guess I lost it. he wrote his first novel was The Time Machine, and written and published around 895, I think, and War of the Worlds was around 98. So he wrote a couple other novels in between, including the two I just mentioned, and a couple non-science fiction novels. But War of the Worlds is the one to read, I would say, if you're wanting to get into Wells or just Victorian literature, late Victorian literature, or early science fiction, because it is action packed. It never stops. It does not let up. It's the narrative style. It's kind of an oral history. This guy is speaking from the near future. The early 20th century, back to this Martian invasion of England that happened in, I believe it's set in 1894. He's telling the story. He diverges a little bit to tell his brother's story as if it had happened to him, so he can see another perspective. But it's very much like an oral history of what the Earth goes through in this war. If you've seen any of the movies, I'm sure you're familiar with this tripod thing. But I loved it. It was just a ripping yarn. Wells, in my opinion, had improved massively as a writer between his first and fourth novels. Between Invisible Man and The Time Machine, and by the time he gets to War of the Worlds, it's very fully formed narrative. The character actually has some psychological depth, which the character in The Time Machine really doesn't have. Not that it's important, because The Time Machine has another purpose for being. It was, kind of a vehicle for Wells to talk about his ideas about the increasing stratification of society, which I think was his big theme there with the Eloi and the Morlocks. The Eloi, who are the upper class people who evolve into a separate species from like the working class people of England, who are just depraved savages in the future, where the Eloi are these very effeminate, very ethereal kind of creatures. Sometimes he has difficulty, the time traveler has difficulty determining what sex they are. They're just very refined and ultra civilized, beyond the point of being able to help themselves kind of people. Then the end of the book, I guess I'm mixing up my reviews here, but it doesn't matter. Then the end of The Time Machine, he goes into an even further part of the future, millions of years in the future, and seeing kind of the end of time as far as Earth is concerned, and reports all this back to his friends, having a nice dinner in his flat in London. His group of friends who are described as, they're just described by their profession. Like, there's the narrator, then there's one character called the medical man, which would be the doctor, and there's one called the engineer, I think, and one called the journalist, something like that. They play different roles in society, so it's more than a straightforward novel. It's more of a philosophical kind of story. Where people are. It's not like a psychological novel, but the War of the Worlds is, I think, more. Although the narrator of the War of the Worlds is a very intelligent person, has a lot of knowledge, has a lot of analytical abilities to describe the creatures from Mars and the details of the Martian War. What I didn't know going into the book is that it's the war of, and I saw the subtitle on one of the titles, it's the invasion of England by Mars. It's not an invasion of the entire world. They simply send an invasion to England. It's 1894, so there's nothing really the rest of the world can do about it except watch. I guess maybe they can send some ships or things. There's obviously no planes, they can't lend any kind of support, communications cut off. People are trying to get out of England into some other part of the world. think most people who've seen one of the movies or maybe even heard about it know how this invasion ends. You can make the argument that it's a Deus Ex Machina ending, but the way it's written, it's really not, because it's a war of the worlds. It's the war of the Martian ecosystem versus the human ecosystem. Let me put it that way. And I enjoyed it. Again, I really recommend it as a read if you like entertainment reads, because it's just, there's so much action. This is like wall to wall action, kind of like that. I hate to say it. Steven Spielberg. I don't know. I hate to say it. Steven Spielberg pretty much got that right in his movie, his Tom Cruise movie version of it, where it's just a constant battle. It's just people learning about the aliens and kind of watching helplessly and having very little, having not much of an ability to defend themselves until the inevitable happens. And it's a great vision of a different kind of civilization. In fact, one thing the narrator mentions is that, some of the people that are on sort of the perimeter of the battle, they're expecting humanoid Martians. They're expecting something, when they hear rumors and the Martians coming across the countryside and things like that, they're expecting a much more even matched kind of thing. So there is a great sense that Wells captures of them being truly, truly otherworldly, truly alien, compared to what was generally conceived at the time and what we usually even conceive now with like Star Trek aliens and things like that, where everybody's kind of a humanoid. They're very, very different than us. And we don't really have any communication with them. It's really just the long battle and the failure of that I won't go into. You can figure it out for yourself, but that is really a pretty cover though. So I guess I'll just hold that up. And I think I had one more. What was my other cover I had of this that I thought was pretty cool? That's probably based on more of a... Oh, maybe I didn't save them all. This looks like probably more of an accurate. Maybe this illustration was from a contemporary illustration from a magazine or early edition of the novel. You see these kind of goofy eyes the alien has. Or this is an enclosure. This is one of his very interesting concepts that Wells has about aliens. In this is they're basically evolved to the point where they're just a brain. They're just a mind, a soft sort of fleshy, mostly brain organism, and they have the ability to design all kinds of different robotic bodies for themselves, depending on what they need to do. So they wear, like the way they don't wear clothing, but they wear equipment. They're, in a sense, I guess maybe we would say they're in some sense cyborgs, what we would call cyborgs today, because their bodies are manufactured to be utilitarian for whatever they want. Here's another cover from the Time Machine. It's just a pretty cool abstract cover. This is probably from the... Oh yeah, this would have been about the time the movie came out, so I guess the 50s, but this kind of cover, this sort of illustration was really popular in the 50s and early 60s for science fiction novels. Really beautiful, but not really accurate. I suppose it's accurate enough that it could be a man and a machine, and that's all I have to say. I don't know if I'll try and get around to the Professor Challenger stories of Conan Doyle, The Lost World, and all that this time or not. I have some other stuff picked out. What I thought I'd do, since I already started with H.G. Wells, is for my decades, I'm going to try and stay away from... I'm going to try and find stuff that is not influenced by American science fiction magazines, which is mostly what I read, and which is most science fiction. So I've got a couple ideas for coming out for people who came from outside the pulp tradition outside the John Campbell astounding tradition, outside the Hugo Gernsback tradition, and see if I can find a couple more British writers so I can fill in each decade. And then when I get to the 70s, I'll go back to Robert Silverberg and Roger Zelazny and all the great writers that wrote in the greatest decade of science fiction writing. So that's it for now. Leave me a comment if anybody's still watching these channels. I know this one's kind of rocky, but whatever. I'll try and keep doing them for a while. We'll see how it goes. Thanks.